Hello everybody, this is the second part of my review of this discussion between Subboor and this caller. At the end of the first video, we realised Subboor couldn't make any plausible argument against homology, especially when presented with hard evidence such as the endogenous retroviruses. The discussion now moves on to other areas, starting with junk DNA.
We had the whole entire study from ENCODE, the Encyclopedia of DNA Elements in 2012, that Darwinists were basically saying junk DNA, God needs to go back to school and all this type of stuff. And for many, many years, this wasn't even investigated. And later on, we found out actually 80% of what we call junk, according to a study, is not actually junk, but it's actually functional.
For this section, I have leaned heavily on this video from the Creation Myths channel. I will link it in the description. Subboor claimed 80% of junk DNA was found to be functional. The ENCODE study in fact found that there was some biochemical function for 80% of the genome. However, very little of it had a function. Most of the newly found biochemical activity is probably spurious, with the genome transcribed into RNA but not translated into proteins.
So again, with these accidental insertions, and you use the word insertions here, this from a creationist perspective, a common design perspective, is the same as, for example, the idea that we have a lot of bacteria. So this could be part of the creation narrative. There's no inherent problem with that. The problem that does actually exist is when the ERV argument is used as an argument as if it's not based upon homology, because the whole problem with homology, and I really want to destroy it from its very root. The main problem with the argument from homology is that if you use it in a circular way, then obviously it's not valid. However, if you use it in a non-circular way, and there are non-circular ways that the homology argument can be used, something like the maximum likelihood method, and they would use all these probabilities to do that, they are still assumptions that you need to make.
Having just listened to this waffling segment, it's clear he's completely lost on homology. It's not a circular argument because homology is the best explanation of the fact that we observe. He can't come up with any other explanation because, for religious reasons, he can't accept human-chimp common ancestry, whatever evidence you provide.
Transition probabilities and origination probabilities. I will explain it to you, but if you do not know this distinction, then don't bother trying to use the argument for homology, because this is the very foundation of homology.
He starts to move on to some mathematical arguments. This article explains why mathematical arguments against evolution are flawed. I will link it in the description. Let's listen to the arguments made.
The very basis of homology is origination probabilities and transition probabilities. And if someone doesn't know those, then don't bother using the argument for homology. It's actually ridiculous.
What's ridiculous is trying to use a mathematical argument when you can't work out the probabilities. What is the origination or transformation probability? Can you give an actual number that can be used in an equation? We know the area of a circle if we know the radius because there's a clearly defined mathematical formula. We can't alter the variables to give a different area of this circle as they are fixed. We can't use this for events that have already occurred. We can estimate which event is more likely than another but can't assign values. The caller then rather smartly dismisses Subboor's arguments about probabilities and tries to go back to the ERVs.
Okay, so what's the huge distinction with ERVs here? What is your explanation for the origins of ERVs? Because listen, because you cut me off and I was trying to explain something. You're responding to a circular argument of similarity, therefore ancestry. I'm speaking to the mechanism by which the similarity arose. I'm not saying like post facto we have a similarity. I was referring to the mechanism by which the similarity started, and that mechanism was a viral insertion at a specific point in many places, and you have those across the genome. It's an argument from the mechanism by which the similarity arose, and you don't get those hundreds of insertions at the same points by random chance unless you want to give an argument as to another plausible way by which we get this.
So in summary, what he's saying is shown here. We have many endogenous retroviruses in the same location in the human and chimp genomes. By far the most parsimonious explanation is that they were inserted once in a common ancestor. This is evidence of homology. It would be exceedingly improbable for the endogenous retroviruses to insert themselves in the same part of a human and chimp's genome completely independently.
You do admit this is an argument from homology, but the type of argument it is including the mechanism of accidental insertions.
Yes, the mechanism by which the similarity arose.
Sure. In that case, it's still something which we can challenge using the basics of homology.
Right.
If it's an argument from homology, which you previously said it's not an argument from homology, essentially it comes under the same origination probabilities and transition probabilities and homoplasy and all the previous stuff that I've actually covered. You're saying accidental insertion, correct?
Yes, the viral DNA does not insert at a specific point ahead of time.
There are areas of the genome where the endogenous retroviruses are more likely to insert themselves, but this is not something that can be determined beforehand, and there are still millions of spaces where they can insert themselves, so it can be assigned as random.
Are you saying that you can you can actually say with certainty that this is accidental and is also non-functional?
Nothing is said with certainty in science, but we have a good understanding that the endogenous retroviruses are inserted randomly, which is a better term than accidentally. Also, some of them have gained function, as the viral DNA has mutated and has been selected upon by evolution.
Yes, we can observe ERVs inserting all the time. They don't fit into a preordained spot.
No, what I mean is, are you saying this is certain? It's certain that it's accidental and it's certain that it's non-functional?
Certain in terms of all the events we have ever discovered, yeah, sure. But what is your alternative?
Here is further evidence that Subboor is clueless. He repeats the same arguments which he doesn't understand ad nauseum, but if you press him and ask him to give an explanation for something, instead of just criticizing well-supported explanations, he's unable to give any answer. I
just previously mentioned junk DNA, which was supposed to be non-functional, it turned out to be functional.
Well, not all of it. The ENCODE did find that.
wait. First, let's agree, rather than saying not all of it, 20% is left. Let's first agree that the Darwinists were dead wrong here.
At this point, it's clear Subboor has given up on arguing against the endogenous retroviruses and has moved back to junk DNA, an area where he feels more comfortable talking. Let's get ready for some more conspiracy theories.
They were dead wrong when they claimed it was all junk.
That has to be one of the dumbest things I've heard. If DNA was all junk, then we'd all be a mass of nucleic acids, as nothing would be turned into protein.
Yes, anyone who said it was all junk was dead wrong.
Wait. What did you say? Did you say they didn't say this was all junk?
No, I said yes. Anyone who said that it was all junk was dead wrong. But also...
And by the way, just so I enjoy this point a bit, that does include people like Richard Dawkins who are very vocal that it was...
Yeah.
He now starts ranting about evolutionary biologists, probably because they have belittled his creationist beliefs. He seems to have got his information from this book by Jonathan Wells, which was expertly dismantled by Lawrence Moran. I will link these articles in the description. Starting with Dawkins, he wrote about non-functional DNA, but never stated that he thought a huge percentage of our genome was junk.
It does actually include people like Philip Kitcher, who is a militant atheist.
I can't find any comment from Philip Kitcher about junk DNA, but since he wrote a book against creationism, maybe that's why Subboor decided to just throw him in here.
It does include people like P.Z. Myers, who is a new atheist.
Wrong again.
I just want to embarrass these guys because I like how candid you are.
Subboor is only embarrassing himself, as it's clear that he did not understand ENCODE and its findings related to junk DNA.
You said you gave the number of 80% is functional. Now there's a criticism of this figure because it's not that 80% is functional. It's that 80% of our genome is transcribed, which is not the same as functional. You could have stochastic processes randomly transcribing certain parts of the DNA, but by ENCODE's definition, they predefined any transcribed regions as functional. That's not necessarily the case. That was one criticism that scientists made of the way that ENCODE defined things.
Okay, let me just highlight something. Yeah, scientists that were criticizing ENCODE, scientists like P.Z. Myers, who was the most vocal critic.
This bit is truly astounding. The caller has given a fairly accurate explanation of ENCODE's findings, but it went completely over Subboor's head, who just ignored it because he didn't understand or know how to respond to it, and then he went straight back to ranting about atheist scientists.
No, not him.
Okay, who then? Who?
I don't have the name off the top of my head, but the point I made is pretty valid.
Okay, let me just be frank.
But it was not P.Z. Myers. It was not some atheist activist.
P.Z. Myers led the charge against ENCODE, and he's an embryologist.
He was not the only one, but sure.
No. Okay, but let's be frank here, yeah. ENCODE study was something that the Darwinists for many years discouraged. Do you agree with that?
I can find absolutely no evidence behind this claim, so without that evidence, I will assume it was a lie made up in creationist circles.
I think it's very important to show what the Darwinists were up to for decades. For decades, there was discouragement from the Darwinists not to basically study junk. It was seen as a waste of time. So when you say to me, the scientists which are attacking ENCODE, who cares what they think, when the first point to know is the Darwinists were dead wrong. And the reason why they were dead wrong is because they had ideological reasons to believe that junk DNA was there.
And some junk DNA is there, examples being pseudogenes and the endogenous retroviruses we discussed earlier. There was no ideological reason to believe this, and the evidence for it is overwhelming.
However, the thing which I push for, and I hope you push for, and we all should be pushing for, is ideology has no place in biology.
Did he just say ideology has no place in biology? Perhaps he can explain this then.
We can accept, and there's nothing incoherent or in conflict with Islamic texts to the idea that all of life evolved according to natural selection by evolution, and human beings were a miracle, and Bani Adam and our entire lineage goes back to the Adamic couple, right? So we can say we'll accept everything that you guys are saying, except for human beings will make an exception. And they'll say, why? Why are you making that exception? And we'll have to go back to, the epistemic weighing. We'll have to go back to, well, we believe the Quran is the word of Allah, and we believe science is ilm al-dhann, it's the knowledge which doesn't give certainty. Therefore, we go back to the philosophy of science, and therefore we're just explaining the same thing we were explaining before.
Do you disagree that these are, first of all, viral DNA, that this is viral DNA?
Our current understanding is that's what it is.
Okay, if I asked you personally, are you convinced of that?
I am convinced that according to the best understanding that we have amongst the scientific community, that's what they have labeled it as. But I do not believe categorically that we can say it's accidental. I do not believe categorically we can say it is non-functional.
Nobody ever said that it was categorical or absolute, as he probably means. We could be as certain as we can be in science that the ERVs really come from viruses. Whoever states that they are inserted deliberately and not randomly or accidentally has the burden of proof. We've already shown that in some cases the endogenous retroviruses can mutate to perform a beneficial function.
Even if I was to hypothetically accept that we can never find out if we will never find out if these things are functional, I still believe there is no way possible that this can be used as a decisive argument from homology for common ancestry.
then either you haven't understood any of the science here, or you have your head so far stuck in the sand that you are impossible to educate.
Because of the distinction between origination probabilities and transition probabilities,
Okay.
which if you let me explain, then you will understand why it is such a huge problem for the Darwinists. Once you understand origination probabilities and transition probabilities, you wouldn't bother using the argument from homology, even if it's infused with ideas from ERVs like you have, because essentially what it will show is it's all fundamentally based upon an assumption when it's not based on circular reasoning. I'm looking down on you as an evolutionary student and thinking, how could you not know about origination probabilities and transition probabilities? So let's get the stakes in the right order here.
Yeah,
I don't need to convince you of anything. You just need to learn a bit more about evolutionary biology.
Look, I'm sure I know the thing you're talking about without the specific terminology, but look, if I can just make some points. So it seems that when I asked you my question earlier, you seem to say that per all our scientific understanding, these are actually ERV sequences, because they are literally ERV sequences. We can observe how ERVs insert themselves into DNA. There is no preordained spot in which they will insert. So it's simply a viral sequence will not be transcribed by a RNA polymerase or DNA polymerase in such a way that it creates what happens to be a functional human protein, because we know what the proteome of the human genome is. We've studied it. We've cataloged it. A viral sequence does not automatically, in fact, it rarely produces a function, a literal sequence of virus.
Rarely. Can you explain that a little bit more, please?
The word rarely, because I think I've seen one study in which there was some virus and some worm or something. I don't remember what it was.
There isn't one study. There's actually plenty of studies. Yeah.
Of ERVs.
Yeah. So what it basically is it's the problem of induction again, which I was referring to earlier. You cannot make a categorical label for these things like you're trying to do.
And no, I also have no idea what he meant by that comment. He's clearly waffling at this stage as he realises the caller knows a lot more about biology than the average caller to his shows, and he's now resorted to throwing out random philosophy of science words to try and appear as if he knows what he's talking about.
The other thing to keep in mind is that from a common design perspective or creation perspective, we need to define a few things. So you said viral, and let's look into this area because it's a little bit hazy. It looks very clear, but it's not.
Okay.
What would you consider foreign and what would you consider natural to the human being? So obviously we have trillions of bacteria, we have these types of things. What is foreign and what is viral, or sorry, what is natural and what is viral or foreign?
Actually, it is hazy because over time, the viral, or as you say, non-natural, even though they are natural, become integrated into the genome and can evolve new functions which could be beneficial. The bacteria that you've mentioned, however, are commensal and are not part of our genome.
Oh yeah, because of the nature of how long you could have had a certain sequence over evolutionary time within DNA. You could have had an insertion a billion years ago that's still in us now, and you could say, given how long it's been there, it's native. So one way you could go about this is you could simply say something is foreign if it has maybe more recently been inserted into our DNA. It has not been integrated as a functional component.
Right. You do realize that that's purely arbitrary, what you just said.
It is arbitrary, but since Subboor asked such a vague and stupid question, the answer would be arbitrary.
Sure. You asked me for a way, and I said I gave you a way of defining it. That works? Is there any problem you have with it?
No, the problem I have is that you don't have a categorical answer.
Sometimes there aren't categorical answers to stupid questions from people who don't or refuse to understand the science.
You have a subjective value judgment.
That just sounds like you're debating semantics. These are viral DNA sequences, are they not?
I think we're going around in circles here. Firstly, let's just stick to something. Do you agree that what you just said right now, that what you consider foreign or viral is based upon what's been recently, how long we've actually had it within our system? So you'd look at it from a chronological perspective, right?
Sure, that's one way of looking at it. That's not
Right. And
yeah,
all I said here, and I think we should agree on this point at least, is that's a subjective value judgment, and I can come up with something else.
You can, but it's a subjective statement because you asked a stupid question. It's like asking, how old is an old man? You'll get a variety of different answers, but the fault is with the question.
Sure, whatever you want.
Yeah. So if I was to use from a creationist perspective, the idea that God created, all of life, and if there were any insertions, all of this was divinely decreed, and these things were done independently. It's not based on homology. I can make that claim just in the same way you've made this claim.
So, after having been presented with a wealth of scientific evidence which flew over his head, Subboor is so determined to deny human-chimp common ancestry, his basic response is, well, I could make the argument that this is how God wanted it.
So you make the claim. So you say it's the way I'm defining such a term is equivalent to saying that God divinely ordained viruses to insert hundreds of different places in the exact same place. Are you saying those are equivalent?
I'm saying there's no way you can adjudicate between these two subjective value judgments.
Let's not forget that earlier he said ideology should not be a part of biology, yet now he feels that the idea that God inserted the endogenous retroviruses to be an equal proposition. I will end this second part of my response video and resume in part 3. Thank you for watching, and please let me know what you think in the comments section.